Have you ever made a huge life-changing decision and then have a moment of, "Oh shit, I think I made the wrong decision"? If so, this video is for you because we are now on, I think, chapter 14. I arrive in Hawaii to live. And I knew it was going to be difficult with the transition from moving from Chicago to Hawaii, but I had no idea the ride that I was in for. And the next few chapters are uneventful in the sense that I think the most quote unquote fan favorite chapters are the ones with the most drama. One, because they're entertaining. Also, I think people found them the most relatable. The next series of chapters, and I don't want to say this in a self deprecating way because I don't think they're inherently boring, but I do remember when I was editing my book, because when you write a book, you have to reread it a gazillion times in the editing process. And I remember in the editing process not loving this part of the book because it felt kind of slow before it picked up again. But I think as a reader, because nobody ever complained about this chapter or said that it got slow here, but I think as the reader, it felt like a relief because the beginning starts out kind of dark with my dad dying and the drama with Mark and things like that. And then it did pick up with the Tony Robbins event, but now it just kind of settles into some minor challenges and then it builds up to a greater challenge. So, my point is, instead of just going through these chapters in order, I lumped them into topics that the chapters covered. And I'm going to go into more behind the scenes so that I'm not just talking about what happened in the book. Because again, this video series is also for people who have already read the book and they're looking for more behind the scenes stuff. So I'm going to focus on behind the scenes topic for this video, starting with one thing I didn't really talk about a lot in the book was the fact that when I moved to Hawaii from Chicago and kept my corporate job, I was still working on Central Time, which Hawaii does not recognize daylight savings time. So from November through March, the time difference is 4 hours. And then the rest of the year, the time difference is 5 hours. So I woke up every day, well, every weekday at 4 a.m. to work. And in the beginning weeks and months, it wasn't a huge deal because my body was still adjusting to the new time. But eventually, it was a lot to get up at 4 a.m., especially since, 4 a.m., around the time I moved, which is November, it would have been 8 a.m. And even though that, and I would actually log on at like 4:30, which was 8:30 a.m. But being Chicago, like people log on and they're getting to it, they're setting up meetings, they're sending emails, and I had a pretty high profile, high pressure job. So I would log on at 4:30 a.m. and my inbox would already be full. There would already be things on my calendar. Sometimes I would have to join calls at 5 a.m. and actually be speaking. And I worked in finance within IT. So these are millions of dollars of budgets that I would have to be speaking to on these calls at 5 a.m. And it was really hard. And I could get through the adrenaline in the morning to get through it, but then I would usually log off around noon and I would have to take a nap before I could even function because it was just a lot to be getting up that number one, to be getting up that early in the morning, but two, also for my brain just to immediately have to get into Chicago mode and work mode and problem solving mode and doing all the things. And so I don't really go into this in the book. I do mention that I get up at 4 a.m. And I think I mentioned that I like to take a nap after work, but it's like that nap was necessary. I literally could not function. And it was the lack of sleep and this overall adrenaline rush that I would have so early in the morning. So I didn't really talk about that a lot of the book, but that was really, really difficult. And if I'm being honest, I don't think I ever really got used to that. I worked in corporate America and lived here for about 7 years, and I got up at 4 a.m. Monday through Friday for 7 years, and it was hard, and I don't think I ever really got used to it. In terms of just running on autopilot and getting up and having the discipline to get out of bed and turn my brain on to be able to be ready for calls, I did get used to that, but it was extremely tiring, and I completely understand people who work third shift, they usually end up having health problems and stuff as a result of the disturbed sleep. And I understand that now because even though I wasn't working that off of a schedule, it was not a normal sleep cycle at all. So I was definitely going against the nature of my body and sleep rhythm. And that took a toll and I didn't even mention this in the book, which is why it's behind the scenes because there were a lot of little things that contributed to my emotional rock bottom, and I think that was part of it because it was just the general lack of sleep, and sometimes I would feel resentful if someone wanted me to join a call and speak at 5 a.m. because I would tell people I don't prefer that. I can do it because I was a people pleaser. I should have had better boundaries, but some people would just expect that I should be doing that, and I didn't have boundaries against it. So I would start to feel resentful about it. So that was one big thing that happened during this time period, which was the adjustment of getting up at 4 a.m. and working. And I didn't really go into that much in the book. So that's one behind the scenes. Another is and I don't think I went into this in the other videos, but in the book, one of my biggest fears about moving to Hawaii was I felt like I was too old to make friends because I was in my late 30s and I'm like, I'm just too old to make friends. That was the story that I had in my head. But then I went to that Tony Robbins and Gary Vee conference in Denver and I met people. I met Mike. I was like, oh, this is so easy to make friends. I'll be fine. And even in Chicago, I never had a problem making friends because I would go to the gym, I would go to yoga. It was just like, I felt like wherever I went, I would naturally meet people. I even had friends that I met at Trader Joe's and just, being out and about in the world. So I naively assumed, oh, I'm just gonna like do my normal things and I'll start making friends. Well, there were several problems with that assumption. Number one, Chicago as a whole is like a well-oiled machine. Like everybody's on a routine and they're doing the same things at the same time. So I would go to the gym at the same time. I had a schedule for the gym. I had a schedule for Trader Joe's. I had a schedule for when I went to work. And I did work from home most of the time, but when I did go to work, I would take the train and I would see the same people on the train. In a city of millions of people, I would see the same people because everybody generally is on a routine and does things at a certain time. Well, island time is real. It doesn't work that way here. So I would go to the gym at the same time every day or try to go to yoga or do things out and about to meet friends. And I had a routine established. The problem was people here don't work on a routine because again, island time is real. And so I would go to the gym one day at the same time and then go the next day and I would see completely different people. Also, people here aren't as consistent. I don't really know what to label that. I guess you can call it island time. I don't know. But it's like in Chicago, it's like people have a gym routine and they go consistently. But people here, it's like, oh, I may go today, I may go tomorrow. So it was a crapshoot. So I started getting nervous because it's like I'm not seeing the same people. And I worked from home, which that was another thing that was really hard to adjust to was well, actually I'll get to that in a second. I don't even think that's on my notes, so I hope I remember to say it. But I was working from home all the time, so I had to leave my home to meet people. So that was another part of this making friends was intentionally signing up for things and doing things, which again, I'm getting up at 4 a.m. It's really tiring. I have to take my nap every day. So it was very exhausting to be in that schedule and then spend the afternoon and evening trying to do things and because I felt like I was never relaxing because I was always signing up for things and doing things because I wanted to be out and about and meeting people. And even within that, because I ended up signing the two main things I did that were helpful in meeting people on a routine, I signed up for an improv class, which had regularly scheduled classes with the same people. I also signed up for a pole dancing class that had regularly scheduled classes with the same people. So that was extremely helpful in meeting people. But another thing I quickly learned, there were several things. One, people here, for whatever reason, are very flaky. So we would make plans, well, either one of two things would happen. We would make plans, and then the day of, they would be like, "Oh, it's raining, I can't go," or "Oh, I can't go today." And I would take that very personally at first because I didn't realize how flaky people were. But that's the culture. People are just flaky. They'll bail out at the last minute. And being from Chicago, it's like people say yes or no, and then they're committed to that answer. Like, I very rarely had people flake out or bail out on me in Chicago unless it was like a true emergency situation. So that was something that I had to adjust to, was the whole flaking out thing. Or another thing people would do would just upfront be non-committal. Like if I would be like, "Hey, do you want to do XYZ on Friday?" "Oh, well, I'll think about it and let you know." And they would never let you know until the last minute because people don't like to like have things on their calendar or have things scheduled. I think it's just a whole part of the whole non-committal situation. So that was really hard for me to adjust to because nobody would want to commit. And if they did commit, they were probably going to flake out. And again, at the beginning, I was taking that personally. So it was adding to the stress. And there are several components to this, which I now understand. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but I understand them. One is the transplant population is very transient, meaning locals usually stay here. And if they leave, it's because of financial responsibilities. They just cannot afford to live here anymore. But a lot of transplants come here for various reasons. Well, first of all branches of the military have a base on Oahu. So a lot of people come here for the military, which is transient in nature because they get different assignments every few years. And then also, I had a friend who lived here and I did a lot of research about living here. So I knew when I lived here that I was coming here and staying. But a lot of people, they think living here is like vacation, and when they see the reality of it, they don't stay here very long. So people who have roots here are very wary of making friends with newcomers because chances are they're going to leave. But people didn't know how committed I was to staying here because, again, the culture is very non-committal and flaky, and most people don't stay. And I will say I truly understand this part of the hesitancy now because one friend that I made early on, his name is Jacob, he was in the Navy, and I didn't want to be friends with him because he knew he was moving in like a year and a half. And I remember saying that to our other friend, Rob. I was like, "I don't really want to get close to Jacob because he's just going to move." And Rob was like, "Well, that's a stupid reason not to be friends with him." And I thought about it. I'm like, you know what? He's right. So I became friends with Jacob, and then he moved and it hurt. And I've had other friends since him that have moved and it hurts. So I completely understand that aspect now. But at the time, I truly did not understand why people didn't want to be friends with me. And that was why. It was because I was a newcomer. Another dynamic to this is I am a minority here, and the locals, some locals, not all, have a lot of resentment about the colonization of the state. They don't even believe Hawaii is a state because it was illegally overtaken, just like the mainland United States took over the land from the local Native Americans. So there's a lot of resentment around that. So, and it's better now since COVID because there were a lot of transplants that came here during COVID. But again, this is 2018. So it was not as welcoming or inviting. So people were openly resentful toward me for even being here, which is super hard. And this is a topic that I find really hard to talk about even now as a white girl living in technically the United States of America. I said technically, not legally, but it's hard to talk about because I am a minority here and I have been discriminated against for being white. And I felt this a lot in my initial first year here. Like people did clearly, and I'm not all locals. Some locals are very friendly, but some very clearly did not want me moving here. And friends aside, so I initially bought a condo, which I'm going to get to in a minute because that's another huge part of settling in here. Nobody in my building talked to me for like a year. I thought everyone hated me. And then all of a sudden, I think they realized that I was here to stay and they started talking to me. But that also made it super uncomfortable because they would just like give me the up and down and look at me and I would say hi and they would kind of say hi. But it was very clear that they didn't want to talk to me and didn't want anything to do with me. So it just, the whole dynamic of not feeling welcome was so uncomfortable and it was so hard to make friends. Even within improv and pole dancing classes, I felt like it was such a struggle to make plans because it was so like flaky and non-committal and it was just like a whole thing. And this is discussed in the book, but I did have one friend and I was so desperate for friends. And this is Rob. Oh God, I call him something else in the book. I don't even care anymore. I call him something else in the book. His real name is Rob. I won't say his last name or give any other details about him. But I was so desperate for a friend that I leached onto him, but he was so toxic because, well, first, and by toxic, he was exactly like me, and that's why he triggered me so much. But I was very toxic back then too. But he had a girlfriend, but they were super on and off, and he was only interested in hanging out with me when they were off. So I felt very used, but I was so desperate for connection that I took whatever breadcrumbs he gave me. But then that ended up building up a lot of resentment and he truly was just using me for a warm body because I started having health issues, which I don't even think that's on my list. So I don't even know if I'm going to get to that. But he didn't even care what was going on with me. He didn't care that it was a struggle to get up at 4 a.m. He didn't care that I was having health issues. All he cared about is if I was hanging out with him or not. And I did finally get to the point where I'm like, this is so effing toxic and I don't even want to be friends with this dude. And this was at a time where I didn't have any other friends, but I was like, that's better than this guy. So I actually had to cut off the friendship with him before I had made a lot of other friends. But I will say it was a good decision because having no friends is better than having a toxic friend. But that was another thing that I didn't really get into in the book was I did talk about it was hard to make friends, but I didn't really get into the reasons why or how much or how bad I was struggling with that. So, yes. So making friends, it was exhausting and not productive. And I will say this, I started making friends when I let go of all expectations because I was trying so hard. And finally, I just got so exhausted. I'm like, I don't really care if I have friends or not. And surprise, that's when I started making friends. So, this is a lesson in energy because whether you believe in science or woo woo, energy is real. And when I let go of the desperation and expectation, that's when I started attracting friends to me. So that was the other thing. So the work thing? Oh, I was going to say something else about work. Working remotely all of the time. So when I worked in Chicago, I actually did work from home most of the time. But if I had cabin fever or whatever, or if I knew an executive was going to be in Chicago or be in the office, I would go to the office. I didn't have that option in Hawaii. So, and because this was at a time where not a lot of people were working remote, I started to feel, oh, this actually is on my notes. There's a whole other dynamic about my job, but I started to get worried about my job because it's like, I'm not showing face. If people don't see me, they might forget that I still work here. So there was this urgency with my job. I started setting up calls with people just to talk, just to be like, hey, I'm here, just want to see how you're doing, which at that time was weird because now, like, having coffee chats on Zoom is kind of a normal standard in corporate America or other settings, but back then it was not. So I felt kind of weird doing it, but it's like I wanted to make sure that I am seen and people know that I'm still working here. So working fully remote for the first time was also kind of stressful. And then this is also on my list. When I first moved here, it actually started maybe 3 to 4 months prior to me moving. There was a huge management shakeup at my job, which threatened my role. So even 3 to 4 months before pulling the trigger and moving here, I was like, oh my God, I don't think this is a good idea because I could very likely, like, it was a good probability of me losing my job and getting laid off. And I was like, if I move to Hawaii and get laid off, I am so screwed because this was at a time when remote jobs were not popular. They were available, but they were not popular. Also, local jobs are few and far between and definitely didn't pay as well as my Chicago job. So in my mind, I'm like, I am screwed if I don't have this particular job. And actually, I do think I brought this up because I had to make a decision. Am I doing this or not? But I felt in my heart that it was the right decision. But then once I got here and I had all these other things happen, like I'm getting up at 4 a.m., it's making me tired, I had the friend situation. So now there's all these work dynamics. The first year I lived here, I lived in constant fear of losing my job, which I knew that would be a thing, but then all these other dynamics started creeping up, which made that one thing a lot harder to deal with because it's like I could only be so strong for so long before I would really start letting the doubts creep in and really affect my mindset. So that became a huge thing the first year that I worked here, which also was contributing to the urgency of I need to let people know that I still work here and make sure they know what I'm contributing and make sure I'm seen. So it became this whole extra effort in my job just to be like, hey, I'm here. Like, look how great I am. So working remote 100% of the time from a very remote place totally added to the difficulty in settling in here. And another thing that happened, and I feel like I'm not going to get to everything on my list, and that's okay. So when I first moved here, I had this expectation that, okay, once I move to Hawaii, then my life will be better. But as you can see, things started slowly piling up, and I was noticing that I didn't have the emotional capacity that I would have liked to deal with them. And so I very, very quickly learned that you cannot move away from your problems. So I got in this mindset of, I want to start healing in earnest, meaning I'm not going to do the spiritual bypassing shit. I'm not going to buy a course online and kind of half-ass go through it. Like, I want to fully participate in my healing. So I went to this 3-day healing intensive in LA. The background is, I don't know if you know who Neil Strauss is, but he used to be a writer for Rolling Stone. He ended up writing a book called The Game because he became part of this pickup artist community. So he wrote a book about the game that talked about all about how he was a pickup artist and basically a player, and I would go as far as to say like manipulator of women. And that book became wildly popular. He's also a ghostwriter for many celebrities. He's written for Kevin Hart, Marilyn Manson. I can't even remember everybody. But I didn't hear from Neil for a while. And then I found out that he wrote a book called The Truth, which was a follow up to The Game. And the short version is he ended up cheating on his girlfriend. He got a girlfriend, he cheated on her. So he ended up going to sex rehab. And this book was all about how he turned his life around and ended up getting married and having a son. And if you've read The Game, you will know like how mind-blowing it was for me to hear like that he was married and had a son, because I'm like, oh, he really changed his life. I want to follow whatever he did. So I read The Truth and I started following him on social media because I felt like he was a good mentor to have for healing because he totally changed his life. Well, so he put on this 3-day healing intensive in LA. So I signed up for it. Well, actually, I applied for it and I was interviewed. And I remember in the interview, I was like, this is how my life has been. I just want to change my life and heal. So I got accepted. And the crazy thing about Neil's events, he has an all male, it's called the Society. At least it used to be called the Society, but it's an all men's group for healing. But this event was opened up to everybody. But even then, I think there were like 100 people there. There were only like maybe 10 or less females. So this dynamic was already kind of strange to me because I was one of the few females. But when I call it a healing intensive, the word intensive doesn't even scratch the surface of how intense this was because we went deep into our wounds. And I have never, first of all, I've never been so vulnerable in my entire life around people I barely even knew, but I've never heard anybody else be more vulnerable because we all had to be vulnerable with each other. But that event, it, and I'll get to this later in the book or in this series, it wasn't the beginning of my healing journey in earnest. That didn't come until after my rock bottom, but it did plant the seed because I started realizing how deep my childhood wounds actually were and how much I had been reaching for romantic connections and these other things to fulfill me in the ways that my parents did not. So that really brought to light what my dysfunction was. And also, another thing I want to point out about this intensive, I learned several key concepts that were changed my life. And I'm going to share them with you because I am not gatekeeping. But one was question everything you do and why you do it. Even if you say something or do something, ask yourself, why did I do that? And that will leave clues to your childhood trauma and what you still need to heal. And I have a saying, it's called new levels, new devils. It's not my own personal saying, but I like repeating that saying because I thought that healing was a destination, but it is a journey. So to this day, because I'm further along on my healing journey than I was back then, but to this day, I question everything I do and why I do it to uncover those new levels. And I learned that from Neil's intensive. And I'm not going to go into all of the things, but I do want to share a few of the things that we did to show how vulnerable this was. There were tons of exercises. One of the exercises was we were given 5 cards. 3 were good and 2 were bad, meaning the 5 cards were to be handed out to the other participants. So again, there's about 100 other people there. And one card said, "You look like the most arrogant person in the room." Another card said, "You look like someone I would not like to get to know better." And then the other 3 were positive, like, "You look like someone I would get to like to know better," and things like that. So, and then we all handed out the cards. So this was an interesting exercise because some people got more cards than others. Some people didn't get any cards. Interestingly enough, I got 5 cards back. So I got back the exact same amount that I gave out. And I got 2 of the cards I got were, "You look like someone I would not like to get to know better." And it stung really bad. So that's how vulnerable this was. And I don't know, that may not seem like a big deal to you, but for me at the time, I was like, wow, this hurts so bad. Another thing we did is we had these small groups and we had to take off our name tags and I can't even remember what the exercise was, but it was talking to the 2 other people in our small group. And then after it was done, the name tags were still off. Neil was like, "Okay, we're going to go around the room and you're going to introduce the 2 other people in your group. And if you forget their names, you have to look them in the eyes and say, 'I'm sorry, but I don't care about you enough to remember your name.'" So there were a few groups that went before me, and there were 2 guys. They didn't remember the person's name, and they were trying to skirt around the script because the script was, you have to look them in the eyes and say, "I'm sorry, but I don't care about you enough to remember your name." And they would try to like soften it by, "I'm sorry, I didn't remember your name." And he's like, No, you have to say the whole thing." And the more they drew it out to not say the script, the more embarrassing it was for them. I knew the one guy's name, but I forgot the girl's name, which is funny because her name was Nishan. I will never forget her name, but I forgot it at the time. So I already knew when he got to our group that I would have to do this and it would be more embarrassing if I prolonged the script. So he got to me and he said, "What are the names of the 2 people in your group?" And I said the guy's name and I looked Nushin, or say I forget her name now. I looked her in the eyes and I said, and it makes me wanna cry, like, replaying this memory. I looked her in the eyes and I said, "I'm sorry, but I don't care about you enough to remember your name." and it hurt so bad. Luckily, she was, like, so cool about it, she didn't care because she knew her name was hard to remember, but to this day, I am, like, heartbroken if I forget someone's name, which in a way is kind of a good thing because I care about people enough to remember their name, but this is how vulnerable and those don't even scratch the surface, like, we got so deep into our wounds, and it was crazy. It was very intense. So that's all I'll say about the healing intensive. But the point I wanted to make about that was I learned very quickly you cannot move away from your problems. And that's why I went to the healing intensive. And I was hoping to get through a few more things. Yeah, I'm going to talk about one more thing because it's kind of in conjunction with the healing intensive. So I'm not going to get into the whole story. I did buy a condo about a month and a half after I moved here with the help of my super realtor, Kyle. And so I bought this condo, and maybe a month after that, I think was a few weeks after the intensive. So I got home from the intensive and I'm all like riding high on, yeah, I'm healing now. I'm a functional adult. I can handle life. I'm good. Life was like, hold my beer or whatever the saying is, because then one day I was working from home and I heard something in the bathroom. A shared building pipe was backflowing into my bathroom sink. And I was like freaking out. I was like shoveling out the water by hand. And I called an emergency plumber. The emergency plumber came and everything was fine. But that really freaked me out because I was like, what happened? What if this happens again? The plumber was like this young kid, so he didn't really give me solid answers. I talked to the building manager. Wasn't taking it seriously either. So I started like walking on eggshells, like, what if my place floods? Blah, blah, blah. And then one day, I don't know, I left. I wasn't even gone that long, maybe like 2 hours. I came home and I walk in. So this is my front door behind me. I walk in the front door. This is like the living area in my kitchen. I see water in my kitchen area on the floor. And I was like, oh my effing God. And I walk into my bedroom and bathroom and it was totally flooded. And keep in mind, I had just moved. First of all, this was a brand new condo. And one of the reasons that I chose this condo is because it was very newly renovated because I was like, I don't want to have to do anything for years, at least 5 years. So there was a new hardwood floor, new everything. Not only that, like there's a flood. And I'm new to the island. I don't really know who to call. The last emergency plumber didn't really seem that great. I First, I called the building manager. He was across the island. I don't know what the hell he was doing because he's supposed to be on property during business hours, but he was like, I can't get there for 2 more hours. I had just moved here. So now I have like a bunch of towels and stuff. At that time, I had only my bath towels. That was it. So I had like two bath towels, but my half of my condo was flooded. So it wasn't enough. I had a total emotional breakdown, and it was like this whole thing. The building manager ended up, not only did he call a plumber, but he had to call, people to clean up the standing water, which ruined the floor. So then I had to get a new floor. So my point is I had like gone to this healing intensive and I had some minor things like having a hard time making friends and settling into my job and stuff. So I went to this healing intensive. I'm like, yes, I can do this. But then the flood happened and I was like, I can't handle this. And this is when I had the moment of I effed up. It was such a mistake moving here. This like everything was going wrong, like even things, and I'm a catastrophizer and I hadn't even imagined anything this horrible happening, but it was like everything was going wrong. And I was like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be dealing with this. And I truly didn't feel like I could handle it. And But at the time, I was the strong one. I put on my happy face and externally, like at work or whatever, I pretended everything was fine. But I was having serious doubts because I was like, I thought this was my dream life. It's not going very well at all. I just spent all this money on this healing intensive, and now everything went out the window because I'm having a total emotional breakdown. And it was pretty bad. But I will say I am super proud of myself because I somehow managed to buy a wood floor and get everything done despite only living here for a few months and not really knowing anybody. And I guess that's the main point I want to drive home is in these moments where we're like, I can't handle it, blah, blah, blah. We're not giving ourselves enough credit. We're just getting caught up in our emotions because the truth is, I can figure shit out and I now trust myself that I can. But sometimes in the moments, it can feel very overwhelming. Also, it didn't help that I didn't have any friends here, so I didn't have any emotional support. And it also didn't help that I didn't really get a lot of emotional support from my family because another dynamic was my mom, like my place had just flooded and she was like, "Well, now that you're settled in, I wanna plan a visit." And I'm like, "This is too much." Like, she just didn't get it, and she wasn't supportive, and and also she made a comment like, "Well, you wanted to move there, you should be happy now." And so I just wasn't getting the emotional support on that end either, which made it a lot more hard. So if that is you, like, I feel you and I hear you because it is so hard to not have that support, but we are all way more capable than we give ourselves credit for. So I ended up getting a new floor or whatever. So I think I'll leave it there. And actually, I like that because it ties into the beginning because I was talking about that was my first big moment of, oh shit, I think I made a mistake. But it got a little bit better, then it got worse. So we have a whole roller coaster of chapters coming, and I will see you on the next video.